Can you imagine an apartment in the middle of New York that is only as big as a parking spot? Yes, you heard that right. While the American dream has always been tied to big suburban houses with green lawns and two-car garages, a new trend is taking over social media, Americans trying to live in tiny apartments just like in Tokyo. It started on TikTok and YouTube, where creators show off apartments that barely measure a few square meters. The living room, bedroom, kitchen, and workspace, all packed into a shoebox-sized space. Viewers can't stop laughing and asking, wait, is this an American home or a Japanese student dorm? These videos are going insanely viral, reaching millions of views in just days. One New Yorker joked, "This is my 9 square meters apartment. It's my bedroom, office, and storage, one step does it all." Social media exploded with memes, apartment or coffin, and Tokyo survival simulator. The more people watched, the funnier it got, but also the stranger. Why would Americans, living in one of the largest countries on Earth, choose to live in tiny boxes? Is it just a social media joke, or is it a sign of changing attitudes towards space, convenience, and freedom? Some people commented, "I'd rather sleep in my car than in this box." Others were excited, "This looks fun, like a capsule hotel, cheap and unique." That's why you should stick around until the end of this video. Because behind the humor and the head bumps on those tiny ceilings lies a bigger story about culture, economics, and the minimalist lifestyle sneaking into America. In America, space has always been more than just a convenience, it's a symbol of freedom and success. The classic American dream often includes a 2-story house, a backyard big enough for barbecues, and a garage for 2 cars. Big is beautiful, big is powerful, and big is normal. But on the other side of the world, in Tokyo, the reality is completely different. Millions of people live in one of the most crowded cities on Earth, where every square meter comes at a premium. There, tiny apartments are not strange at all, they're part of everyday life. Capsule hotels, micro-apartments, and shared houses are seen as practical solutions, not bizarre experiments. For the Japanese, it's normal. For Americans, it's shocking. When Americans first saw videos of 9 square meters Tokyo apartments on YouTube and TikTok, their reactions ranged from disbelief to laughter. "No way. That's smaller than my closet," some exclaimed. Others joked, "That's not an apartment, that's solitary confinement with a Wi-Fi router." Yet, curiosity grew quickly. Young Americans, especially those drowning in high rent prices, started wondering, could they actually survive in such a space? Soon, influencers decided to put the idea to the test. In New York and Los Angeles, creators rented or built tiny apartments modeled after Japanese flats. They replaced regular beds with futons, added sliding doors, and squeezed in kitchens barely big enough for a rice cooker. The results were both hilarious and fascinating. One video showed a 6-foot-tall American man crouching just to enter his bathroom. Another showed a girl trying to stretch her yoga mat but realizing it covered the entire floor. Viewers were hooked. Memes spread like wildfire, apartment or coffin? Tokyo training simulator. The humor came from the contrast. America is the land of supersize culture, giant burgers, massive trucks, and huge houses. Yet now, Americans were voluntarily stepping into spaces smaller than a college dorm room. Some viewers laughed until tears came out, others felt claustrophobic just watching. But one thing was certain, everyone was curious. Could tiny living really work in America, even as a joke? And what would it say about changing values in a country built on the idea of bigger, better, more? So how did this bizarre yet fascinating tiny apartment trend begin? To understand it, we need to travel back to Japan, the birthplace of minimalist living. In Tokyo, with its population density and sky-high housing prices, maximizing space became a necessity, not a choice. The Japanese developed micro-apartments, capsule hotels, and ingenious storage solutions. Tourists who visited Japan often filmed themselves staying in these tiny spaces. Their videos showed compact kitchens, foldable futons, and showers barely big enough to turn around in. American viewers were stunned. Comments poured in, "That's not an apartment, that's a closet with plumbing." Others wrote, "I'd last 5 minutes before losing my mind." But fascination grew alongside the laughter. Slowly, American creators began to wonder, what if we brought this Tokyo lifestyle to the US? The first wave came from travel vloggers who wanted to recreate the experience at home. They rented small units in New York City, painted them white, added sliding doors, and decorated them with Japanese minimalism. Some even installed loft beds so low that you couldn't sit upright. Soon, TikTokers turned it into a challenge. Can I survive 1 week in a Tokyo-style apartment? The results were hilarious. One guy filmed himself hitting his head 10 times in a single day while climbing into bed. Another girl tried cooking spaghetti, but realized her pan was longer than the stove. Viewers loved the struggle, turning it into a running internet joke. But the origin story isn't only about humor. For many young Americans, it was also a form of rebellion against traditional housing culture. Instead of chasing a big house they couldn't afford, they embraced the absurd idea of living tiny. Influencers framed it as a social experiment. Could small living make you more disciplined, more minimalist, or even happier? Some participants claimed it did. "I realized I don't need 20 pairs of shoes," one TikToker confessed. Others just laughed and gave up after 2 days. The irony is that the trend caught fire in the very cities where rent is most unaffordable. In New York and San Francisco, people joked that tiny apartments weren't a challenge, they were reality. But still, the Tokyo-style experiment had a different flavor, voluntary, playful, and meme-worthy. What began as shock and curiosity evolved into a cultural trend, blending humor with social commentary. And that origin story, half comedy, half critique, is exactly why it resonates so much today. Today, the tiny apartment trend has become a real phenomenon on social media. On TikTok, hashtags like #TinyApartment, #TokyoLiving, and #microliving have racked up millions of views. Creators film themselves squeezing into spaces barely larger than a walk-in closet. The videos often start with a dramatic tour, "Welcome to my entire life in 9 square meters." What makes people laugh is the exaggerated struggle. One YouTuber tried to cook ramen, only to realize the stove and sink were so close that the noodles boiled over into the dish rack. Another filmed himself bumping his head 5 times in a row just trying to climb into the loft bed. Viewers stitched these clips into memes. Tiny Apartment Olympics became a running joke. But beyond the comedy, the trend has touched on deeper issues. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, rents are skyrocketing. For many young Americans, a tiny apartment isn't just a joke, it's the only affordable option. Some landlords have even started marketing micro-apartments as Tokyo-style living to attract curious tenants. Travel vloggers, meanwhile, treat it as a cultural experiment. They book these places for a week, film daily routines, and compare them to living in Japan. The funniest clips show Americans trying to host guests. 2 friends barely fit into the room, sitting cross-legged like they were in a kindergarten circle. "If you sneeze too hard, you'll redecorate the whole apartment," one joked. Others highlight the benefits: no clutter, less cleaning, and lower utility bills. One TikToker proudly said, "I can clean my entire apartment in 7 minutes." Still, most people admit they couldn't last forever. "It's fun for a week, but I miss stretching my arms without hitting the wall," another confessed. Tourists are also joining the fun. Some Airbnb hosts now offer Tokyo-style tiny apartments as themed stays. Guests book them not for comfort, but for the story. "It's like camping indoors," one traveler laughed. Social media feeds are now filled with clips of tall Americans folded into tiny kitchens and bathrooms. For viewers, the humor lies in the contrast, a nation famous for supersize culture suddenly celebrating miniature living. And whether people love it or hate it, they can't stop watching. The tiny apartment trend is more than just a funny internet challenge. It reveals a shift in how young Americans think about space, lifestyle, and even identity. For decades, American culture has celebrated bigger is better. But Gen Z and millennials are increasingly drawn to minimalism. They see small living not as a downgrade, but as a creative challenge. Social media plays a huge role in this shift. On TikTok, influencers turn cramped kitchens into stages for comedy skits. On YouTube, creators upload full apartment tours, comparing tiny American rentals with Tokyo flats. Viewers are fascinated by the contrast: America, land of SUVs and giant malls, experimenting with shoebox apartments. Memes make the experience even more appealing. People laugh at the struggles, bumping heads, cooking disasters, awkward sleeping positions. But they also admire the resilience. Look, he's making it work. This mix of humor and admiration fuels the trend. There's also a sense of cultural curiosity. By living in tiny spaces, Americans feel they're getting a taste of life in Tokyo without leaving home. Some even say it's like cultural cosplay. Minimalist enthusiasts argue that tiny apartments teach discipline and efficiency. You realize you don't need 100 things, you only need the essentials, one TikToker said. For tourists, the appeal is novelty. Booking a tiny apartment on Airbnb becomes a story to brag about later. It felt like living inside a reality show, one traveler joked. For urban planners and architects, the trend sparks debate. Could micro-apartments be a real solution to housing shortages in American cities? Some praise the efficiency, while others warn about mental health risks of long-term confinement. But regardless of the arguments, one thing is clear. Tiny living has captured the imagination of millions and turned into a cultural symbol. From memes to travel blogs, from TikTok skits to academic debates, the tiny apartment is now more than a room. It's a stage, a joke, a statement, and maybe even a glimpse of the future. In the end, the tiny apartment trend is more than just people squeezing into funny little rooms. It's a reflection of how culture, economics, and humor collide in unexpected ways. For Americans, it's ironic. The land of wide open spaces is now fascinated by living in boxes. For viewers, it's entertainment. Every clip feels like part sitcom, part survival show. And for creators, it's an endless source of content. Every bump on the ceiling becomes a punchline. Some will say it's just a phase, a fleeting internet craze. Others believe it hints at something bigger, a growing interest in minimalism and alternative lifestyles. Either way, the tiny apartment has earned its place as a cultural symbol of 2025. So what about you? Would you survive in a 9 square meters apartment for a week? Would it feel like an adventure or like a punishment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Only in America for more strange, funny, and unforgettable stories from across the US. Because sometimes, reality in America is stranger and funnier than fiction.